Okay, we're rolling.
This is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York, the 15th of December 2005, approximately 1 p.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Sure. Billy Charles Willard Jr., and I was born October 13th, 1956, and my place of birth is Devonshire, Bermuda.
Okay, what was your educational background prior to entering service?
Just a high school graduate.
Okay. Now you enlisted? Or were you-
I enlisted in the Air Force
Okay.
as a law enforcement specialist in LA.
All right. Now you mentioned you're an Army brat. Could you
I
tell
was
us
an
about
Army
that?
brat. My dad, I was adopted by my mother's cousin because she had too many children and her cousin couldn't have any children. And I was given my dad's name, who I call my dad today, and he was in the Army. And so we got to travel extensively across the country and overseas during a real tumultuous time, the 50s and the 60s. So I grew up wanting to join the military, but I didn't want to go in the Army like my dad.
Why?
Well, I wasn't all that enthralled with what I saw, and of course, I think the movie The Green Beret was out by then, and so I went to an Army recruiter after I'd gone to an Air Force recruiter and tested, and I says, yeah, I want to go to Vietnam. He says, yeah, no problem. You want to go airborne? Yeah, no problem. You want to be a snake eater? No problem. But it turned out that because I was 17, well, I was 16 when I did the paperwork, but when I turned 17, my dad said he lost the paperwork in the mail for the Army, but he retained the paperwork for the Air Force. So, it was accidentally lost, because he knew the first thing they were going to do is turn me into an 11 Boo, infantry, and he didn't want to see that happening, so that's how I ended up joining the Air Force.
Okay. When did you go into the Air Force?
It was June 1974.
All right. Where did you go for basic training?
Basic training was at Lackland, the Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas.
Could you tell us about your basic?
It was sort of like a repeat of what my childhood was like. A lot of yelling, screaming, spitting, hitting you, getting up early, the inspections. My mother used to do that for the first 15, 16 years of my life, or when I became a teenager and old enough to do that sort of thing. So it was just a repeat of that, and I sort of laughed my way through basic training, and the more I laughed, the more the training instructors tried to abuse me. But I'd been through that as a child, so it wasn't anything new.
How long was basic?
I think it was 6 weeks in those days. I don't know what it is nowadays.
Anything stand out, other things about your basic at all? Did you get any specialized training or?
In
they
basic
pick you to
training,
go?
no. I remember, now I suddenly remember the name of the lead training instructor. His name was Sergeant John D. Castro, and he had a vasectomy. And while we were in basic training, and after he had the vasectomy, he couldn't yell and scream at us anymore. I remember that, and I guess being in the 70s, I don't know if it's the same way as it is now, but he was hurting for a while, and so we were lucky.
How were you aware this happened? Did he
Because
tell
he
you,
told
or-
us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he told us. And I remember, of course it was segregated in those days as far as men and women, but I remember a female TI in the chow hall chewing out this one male basic trainee, and I think she cursed him out for 5 minutes, and I don't think she ever used the same cuss word twice. And I was astounded by that. I was on KP that day, and so I just stood there and listened, and I was just surprised that she could do this. And I always wondered where those curse words came from.
Where did you go after Lackland?
Actually, I stayed at Lackland.
Oh.
All I did was move across the base on a shuttle bus. That's where the security police school was, the White Hats. And I was in the law enforcement specialist career field. And I stayed there for about 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks.
What was that training like?
Well, it's learning how to be a security policeman on base, learning how to do traffic tickets, do accident investigations, responding to alarms, responding to riots. You know, we had the old flag vests in those days. I don't know if you remember those things. They must have weighed about 15 pounds or more. Sweater and all get up. And of course we learned how to do night fire with the M16, and we carried the riot batons, and we carried mace, and we fired shotguns and M60 machine guns, which was kind of usual for the Air Force. But we were the combat arm of the Air Force in those days.
Now, at that time, I know within the Army there were some problems with drugs. Were you having any trouble in the Air Force?
Oh, sure. In those days, when I got to my first duty station, actually, is where it was more prevalent. A lot of pot, a lot of hashish, and I don't know if other people were doing heroin, but I know in the security police squadron, we were the biggest abusers of using different types of cannabis and using alcohol. And I think that was something that occurred at a lot of military installations. The police, whether they were shore patrol or military police or air police, were the ones, because nobody could investigate us. Nobody would come into our barracks. So we had the best weed, or we had a lot of weed, different types. We had the peyote, we had the booze. We used to stand alerts, operational readiness inspections, drinking Johnny Walker Black, I think, or Johnny Walker Red. And when we got sick, when we were on duty, we'd call the base hospital, and they would give us Valiums and Darvons and things like that.
So that must have been before the urinalysis program.
We had urinalysis at basic training. In fact, the first thing they did when we got off the bus at Lackland Air Force Base was say, march in that building, and then you're going to have a urinalysis. But in the real world at Travis Air Force Base, we kind of knew when we were going to be called up for urinalysis, and they rarely bothered the security police squadron because of our duty assignments. That's like, for instance, there was a shot that you had to be given when you deployed, a gamma globin shot. Well, security police could decline that shot because of their career field. And so people pretty much left us alone as far as that sort of thing, the drug testing. But I remember we used to have what they call blunts nowadays. We used to have cigars made of pot. I mean, real cigars made of pot, not a little insert. And we'd be smoking them, working on our cars outside our barracks. Our girlfriends would come in Friday night with bags of groceries from the commissary and PX, and then you'd see them leaving Sunday morning, which was a no-no because women weren't allowed in the barracks in those days. Our parties were the most outrageous. There was somebody that was getting out to be a doctor, Mark Eisenberg, I think his name was, and he passed out, and so we had him on his bed with his arms over like he was in a coffin, and somebody put an American flag over him. And his roommate came in and freaked out because he thought he was dead. We thought it was hilarious. I mean, you know, we did things like that.
Okay. So did you stay at Lackland, or were you assigned elsewhere?
No, my first duty station was Travis Air Force Base. I think it was in September of '74. And that's when we had the final evacuation of Vietnam. Two of them, actually. There was a military one, and then when we lost the C-5 over in Saigon, then they started the civilian. I can't remember the name of it. It was had a red dragon. It was a red insignia on the rear of the aircraft. I can't remember. They were a common carrier for the military, civilian carrier. But they were the ones that picked up the final evacuation about Vietnam.
So you were there when they were bringing
Yes,
them in?
and about a year ago I had the occasion to meet somebody who heard me talking about that. He said he was like 4 or 5 years old coming into Travis Air Force Base at the time that this occurred. He was one of these kids from Vietnam, and he's like 30, 34, 35 years old now, and he said he was one of those children, and I was like shocked. It's like, you know, it's full circle after all these years. And just by chance he heard me talking to another soldier about it. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Now, how did you feel seeing all these refugees coming in like that?
Well, when you're 18 years old, you really don't care. You know, I mean, to us it was extra duty. We hated it because we had to wear the flak vest. We had our 38s on, we had the mace, we had the radios, we had the riot helmets with the big glass shields, and you had the batons and all this garbage that you're wearing, and we're running around the base, and we had the Dodge crew cabs, what we called a Dodge six-pack, and it was hot, and we just wanted to get out of this stuff and go have a beer and smoke a little dope or something.
Did you have any problems at all?
The biggest problem we had is that some of the refugees had money, I guess gold or precious stones, and they would offer these to GIs to marry them so they could become American citizens. And so eventually what we did, there was an annex gym, or a gym annex, I'm dyslexic there, by our squadron barracks. And we housed them there, and we had to put armed guards around the building, because that was the only way to make sure that they didn't get out and the GIs didn't get in. Because, I mean, I gotta admit, the Asian women were very, very intoxicating to most GIs. I mean, all they had to do was smile and, yeah, what do you want? They were very beautiful women.
Mm-hmm. What other assignments did you have there? You were there 2 years?
Well, I had the occasion. Chiang Kai-shek's widow came into this country ostensibly to visit the embassies for the Republic of China. But actually what she was doing is bringing in a whole bunch of gold and precious stuff. I remember her convoy came in like at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. In the middle of the night, Customs had to open up the Customs section. It was a complete blackout of the regular terminal at the base, which is very, very unusual. And there was this huge convoy of all these vehicles. I think the Secret Service was involved, and the California Highway Patrol, and then the local police, and then of course we were involved. And then I guess after about a few weeks later she came back, and we had the same rigmarole going back inside the gate, and 2 o'clock in the morning, mysterious flight out. One of the most unusual things I think that occurred at Travis was I was on the main gate, and somebody's child had asphyxiated in a closet, and it was around New Year's Eve. And I just remember we had the old Cadillac ambulances, like the ones that they had with Kennedy when he was assassinated. And there were 2 of them coming up the main drag, code 2, and you couldn't, just lights flashing. And you couldn't hear anything. And this is, like a few minutes after midnight. And I remember just staring down the main drag, seeing these 2 ambulances coming up, because they had to make a right turn close to the just free exit of the gate, the base. And I just thought, how strange, there's no sound coming from these vehicles, but I know cars make noise. I just remember that apparently that they found, the child went in the closet to play with the coats, and they found him right after midnight. And that sort of stuck out in my mind. And there were other instances, but that's poignant.
Okay, where did you go from Travis?
I went to Soderstrom Air Base, Greenland, of all places. I was supposed to go to Guam, but I'd taken leave and I'd come back, and they said, hey, good news, you've got a new assignment. And I mean, I was literally packing to go to Guam. I'd met my sponsor, I had my PCS mailbox and everything. And I came back, they said, no, you're going to Greenland, go down to the base dispensary and get your new shots. So I left Travis in April, and I still had a lot of leave. I didn't have to report to Greenland until July. And I lost my virginity on the way. 18-year-old kid. So going to Greenland was an experience. The first thing that met me when I got off the airplane was a mosquito that bit me. I mean, they were about as big as the ones down there in Houston, maybe even bigger. I mean, they were like that big. And I like Greenland, and I have a lot of memories, mixed memories about Greenland.
What do you mean mixed memories?
Well, the year I was up there, we lost quite a few people. We had an airplane crash, a C-141 crash. Of the 69 people on board the aircraft, 2 people survived, a navigator and a Danish passenger. We also lost a lot of people in boating accidents, rafting accidents. Some people were swimming at the row club, and they thought that they saw an air pocket, and it wasn't really an air pocket. It was like 3 feet of clear ice, you know, the water up there is so pure on the lakes that it looks like there's waves on the surface, but the waves are actually underneath the ice, but it looks like, and so people, you know, after they've had a few drinks at the NCO club, they would, or a little bit too much of the aquavit or whatever, they would go swimming at the row club or one of the lakes, and they would challenge each other to come up in an air hole, and some of the people unfortunately did not come up. So we had to drag for their bodies, recover their bodies. So it was a bad year in that respect for me. But in another respect, it was probably one of my best Christmases, because I remember I'd been promoted to sergeant, E4, below the zone, ahead of schedule, even with an Article 15 in my background. But I remember me and my desk sergeant were in the cop shop, and the choir came in from the the chapel, and they started singing Christmas carols, and I had a fruit cake and a plain cake that had somehow made it unscathed from my cousin in California. And so I went and stole a can of coffee from the chow hall, and we had some powdered milk up there, and me and my desk sergeant celebrated Christmas at the top of the world. I mean, literally at the top of the world. And then I had to drive out to the AFARTS, Armed Forces Radio Television Service, the TV and radio station. He was about 4 or 5 miles away from the base. You had to cross a fjord and up this hill that was curved. No lights out there, blinding snow. But he had to be checked on to make sure he was okay. And so after we had the coffee and some of the cake, I drove out. I remember driving out. That was my most favorite Christmas at top of the world.
Did you run into any problems with crimes or anything?
Oh, sure.
There-
Besides, we had racism, we had theft. Racism was still going on in the military in those days. The biggest thing up there was the problem that we had with alcohol. Not just the GIs, but the Danish civilians, who their barracks were also right next to ours. And a friend of mine who was Danish, we called him, his nickname was Scotty, because he liked Scottish bagpipes, and he taught me to like them. To this day I still like them. And he taught me how to drink aquavit. He got drunk when his Eskimo girlfriend decided she didn't want to see him anymore. I mean, he got real drunk. And he beat her up, then he started to commit suicide. He said he was going to commit suicide, and he had a knife. So they knew that we were buddies, so they called me in one night, and he says, "Billy, I can't hear the bagpipes, I can't hear the bagpipes." That's because we like to listen to bagpipe music all the time. And I talked him down, and we got the knife away from him. So problems dealing with alcohol were our biggest issue. The other problem was people fed the animals, like the Arctic foxes, without realizing that these are wild animals, and they can bite. Some of them may be rabid, so we used to have to go out and shoot them with our 12-gauge shotgun, and we used to keep a score. You know, we all had nicknames in the office. I used to have my ID card. I don't know, we made our own little ID cards, and there was KIA, probable, wounded in action, and missing in action. And this, we all kept a score of all the people in the cop shop as far as when we were shooting the Arctic foxes. And people used to hate us for killing these animals, and we said, these are wild animals, you know, and somebody's child has been bitten. But once I understood that, you know, they left us alone.
Now, did you ever experience racism there?
Oh, sure. I experienced racism there. I
And
experienced it
elsewhere?
at Travis Air Force Base, and I experienced it when I was stationed later on at Randolph Air Force Base. Racism is probably, and it still goes on to this day. And it's not going to go away no matter who mandates it, whether it's the President of the United States or the Congress. Because when it gets to it, it's down to the bunch of guys in your squadron or your flight or your platoon or your company. That's what it gets down to, not what somebody 2,000 or 3,000 miles away mandates. You know, and so it exists, and so does sexism. Women are probably raped almost every day, probably in the military. When I was in tech school training, there was a tech school student that was raped by an instructor. So we decided to go beat the crap out of him with tire iron rods, and we left him a message. Some of my classmates and I, Was it illegal? Yeah. But the system wasn't going to take care of this individual. He was going to get away with it. And so she held on to me instead of her fiance that came down there. And it must have been kind of strange because he was from Minnesota or something. Nice white kid, sweet kid. He wasn't in the military. And his fiance kept holding on to me and dragging me all over the place. But yeah, those sort of things probably still go on today in the military, unfortunately.
Did you notice that those that committed acts of racism were punished, or it was just overlooked? Or
It was overlooked. There were still people from the brown shirt Air Force, the brown shoe Air Force, when I was about to be promoted to staff sergeant, which I didn't get later on, there was a guy who was an out-and-out racist cracker. He didn't like black people. He still called us boys and niggers. And this was in 1977. But in those days we had these training programs that the civilians had foisted on us, training by objective and things like this, or they sat us in a classroom and then they did reverse role modeling. And so they made him the black guy and they made me the white guy, and we actually got to be friends after the class. But he was left, there were a lot of senior NCOs like that were left over from the brown shoe military. And then there were younger guys who didn't like blacks, and there were a lot of Hispanics, and they didn't care if you were Puerto Rican or Mexican or something else. They just grouped you all into one group. They didn't like you at all. And then there were people that didn't like whites. We had an NCO Club Annex called the 21 Club at Travis Air Force Base when I was stationed there. It was a black NCO club, but people came from as far as from San Diego to go to this club. And they had more guns and knives and bullets than we did in the security police squadron. And they had a lot of drugs. And one night, one of them tried to run me over, civilian from San Diego, and they caught him off base. But these things are still going to exist today because the way people are brought up.
mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, sexism is still going to occur. The thing about, grabbing somebody on the ass, a female, when you're a male, it is wrong in the office environment. It is definitely, definitely wrong. No doubt about it. But it still occurs, and it's going to continue to occur. Sorry, guys.
No,
No,
that's
it's
okay. No. So you obviously went to Randolph after,
Yes, I hated Randolph Air Force Base.
why?
It was a headquarters base. I've never been fond of officers, and it was more for show than anything else. It was known as the West Point of the Air, I think, or the West Point of the Air Force. And I'll give you an example. We would respond to an alarm, and normally when you respond to an alarm in security police, you went to raise pistol. We had the 38, so that meant you just took it out of your holster and you went like this. Well, because the base commander's wife didn't like weapons, we weren't supposed to do that. I says, to hell with that. I says, if we're going on an activated alarm, I'm going to make damn sure that my people are taken care of, that my people are backed up. And I refused, and so I was automatically an outcast in the squadron. I says, no, Air Force Security Police policy says this is how we respond to an alarm. I don't give a damn what the base commander says. This is our safety and the safety of other people. So after that, I started having problems. There was a sergeant she was a white sergeant, who was overseas, had an affair with a black NCO. She was married to somebody else. She got pregnant by this other black airman or NCO and came back to have the baby. Well, I struck up an acquaintance with her, and I'm not going to throw stones at anybody. Morality, human beings are the worst creatures to talk about morality issues. We violate every concept of it, but I became her friend in the squadron, and when she went to have the baby in the hospital, I was the only one that went down there. Everybody else ignored her. She had a miscarriage. I became friends with her, and we became very good friends. I still remember her name, Patricia Johnson. She had a son that she had with her, and I used to babysit him sometimes when she was working. But the racism in the squadron, they actually put me on latrine queen detail in the barracks, and I said, hey, I'm an NCO. That is not commensurate with my experience. And so then I moved to the NCO queue, and after that they couldn't screw me over like that. They found other shit details, if you'll excuse the expression, for me to do. But because of my friendship with her, that put pressure on me, and I told them, I don't know if you'll allow me to, but I told them to go F themselves, basically. And that really pissed them off. And this is from blacks, this is from other whites, and this is from Mexicans. So.
Okay, I guess, so when you finished at Randolph, you left the service?
I left active duty Air Force, yeah.
Mhm.
I went out to California, Santa Monica. I didn't know Santa Monica really existed until I looked it up on a map. I had to drive all the way out there from Randolph. It took me something like 5-6 days.
Okay. Why did you decide to go into the Guard?
I tried to go on the Guard in Texas before I came back up here in '89, and they said that there was a bar because I threatened to beat the shit out of this second lieutenant or first lieutenant that was messing around with me, and he took my NCO status and then processed me out. And he says, by the way, airman, I could have kicked your ass easily, you know, but I had made a promise to my father that I was going to stay in and retire in the military, and he never forgave me for that. So I decided to honor that commitment. I mean, he called me on the day that I would have retired, June 26, 1994, when I was living out in Austin, Texas, and he said, "You could have retired. I'm not going to say anything more about this." But he knew.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to honor that commitment, which I ended up doing. I did retire from the National Guard early this year, July.
So when did you go into the Guard?
I believe it was sometime in 1989. Bobby Arminio was the recruiter, and I went in and out, as it turned out my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and so even though I live a block and a half away, I couldn't always get here on drill when her illness progressed. It's a very tough illness to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So you were stationed out of this armory then?
Right. I was in the Apple Knockers, 42nd Infantry Division. I forget what detachment A or something like that. I don't think it was more than 30 or 40 of us total.
What was your MOS at that point?
They had me. They made me. I think they had me as a 91 Echo dental assistant coming in, but they had me eventually cross-trained to 11 Boo. Then most of my time was spent working as the. In those days, you weren't a company clerk, a UA. I was the assistant UA, assistant unit administrator. You had to manually type up to 1379, the payroll, on the old IBM electric typewriters, and our office was up in the tower. Excuse me. So after drill, we had to type these up, make sure we didn't make any mistakes, separate all the different things, and then walk them up to the post office in these different envelopes and mail them off to Latham and everywhere else. And I used to help. Tommy Fergel was the full-timer, what they call the FRNCO nowadays. He was a UA.
Now, did you go to school for that, or was it OJT?
For what?
To be the unit administrator?
No, it seems to be a natural thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And later on in my adult life, I've been company clerk for my medical company down there in Austin. I worked for the Commissioner of Information Systems at the Texas Department of Health for several years, and just I happen to have natural administrative skills.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Glorified secretary is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can tell us some stories about what it was like in this armory at that time, or?
Well, I'd never been in an infantry unit before, and it was kind of interesting. Everybody chewed just about Kodiak, smokeless tobacco, and that was fine because I never really tried it. I've been using Skoal long cut myself. Everybody had their own knives, if not two, which really scared me at first. And I think we had our company commander in those days was a lieutenant, I want to say Pete Redmond, short little guy, balding, nice guy, young guy. I think I was older than most of the people in the unit. They did some really weird things in the unit because they were 11 Boo, and I was sort of like a real laid-back, civilized person. They would eat the flies in the upstairs hallway. You know, those big green flies. And I says, no, I think I'll pass on that. I've already had breakfast, you know, and I'm really waiting for lunch, guys. But they would do that. We used to do these battle drills where we would have the soldiers ruck up and they would run up and down the stairs from here to the basement and back. And I think I made it 4 times, and then I think the medical company commander, who I was supposed to go into but didn't have a vacancy, he says, no, we need to get letters from their doctor stating that it's okay, because, you know, fully rucked up, that's a lot of weight that you're carrying and going up and down those stairs, because you had to go up like this and then turn for each flight of stairs. But I remember in later years, one day on a Sunday afternoon, they decided that they're going to do a chicken check. Now, I think you gentlemen are old enough to remember what that is, you know. And I said, there's no way in hell I'm going to do that. So they broke out a ruler, and they had him in formation outside the armory, I want to say on the left side, facing across the street to the fire department. People are getting out of church, and it was unbuttoned trousers, whip them out, guys. And a sergeant went down the line with a ruler. And I oh my gosh, I was cringing. My face probably turned 6 shades of red. Now, I went inside. I refused to be a part of it, because in those days I was working in the police department, and people knew me. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and God help you if somebody's child saw this. But that's what they did. You know, it's a little weird. A lot weird.
I guess so. Now, how long were you in the Guard? You said you just...
I went in '89, and I think I took a year off or 6 months off, and then I ended up transferring to the 646 Medical Unit and studying to become a medic. And of course the training was right back down here. I lived in Glens Falls, and the unit was in Glens Falls, because I had moved by then. My sister moved up to take care of my grandmother. And so we had to come down here, I think, every other month and then on a regular basis for medical training. I remember having a flashback to the airplane crash when I was in training. In the room right opposite it was on this side of the tower, there was a classroom. And they were talking about mass trauma. And I was suddenly 19 years old, and I was back on the flight line. I could see and smell the smoke, and I don't know if you gentlemen have ever smelled burnt human bodies, but it's something that stays with you for the rest of your life. And sometimes when it intrudes on you, you recognize it instantly. So I had 2 flashbacks, and again, I was back on the flight line. And when I came to, in both cases, I was outside the classroom, had no idea that they had dragged me outside the classroom. Apparently they said I just locked up. And they suggested I seek medical help, so I saw a social worker up there in Glens Falls who said I blamed myself for the airplane crash, and I said I don't know how I wasn't involved. I was in the chow hall getting ready to have lunch. You know, you remember where you were in certain traumatic things, like we all remember where we were when Kennedy was assassinated in '63. But I saw her for about 6 months, and then I ended up going back to Texas. And I couldn't figure out why until years later. I've had a problem flying. I'd usually take a couple of double Bloody Marys before I got on the airplane. And then the docs down there in the Austin Medical, the VA clinic, told me, yeah, you suffer from some PTSD, but it's not intense enough to be rated as disabling. And I said, well, you know, does it have to do with this airplane crash? And they said, yeah, you got some serious issues about airplanes. I said, okay. But they have medications that you can take for that. But, so I got out of the Guard in July of 2005. I had 20 years and probably a handful of days. And I was a medic. I had about 6 or 7 MOSs racked up by the time I left the Guard. Including one which I never understood, generator repairman. I says, you know, they said I had that here. I says, no, I don't know anything about generators. In my first year in Texas, they had me maintain the camp generator, and but I don't know how to maintain a generator. This MOS slipped in. Army said I had it, or the National Guard said I had it. But I learned how to do everything about those generators. So I became MOSQ after a while. In addition to my other MOS as being a dental assistant and a company clerk and whatever else they needed. I taught classes for the combat lifesaver students from other companies because now these kids are being sent to Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo, Bosnia, and I guess they're still sending them to the Philippines, or there's probably still active duty going to the Philippines. Yeah.
Now, I think before, when you were in the museum, you talked about some of the ones that are being sent over with the medical training are not being used as medics.
Right. A lot of my kids, I'm sorry, they're not my kids. A lot of my people, they're medics. And today the Army medics are trained to be EMT paramedics. They have national registry. They have to take so many classes every year called continuing education units to maintain their proficiency and to maintain their license. One or two of them have come back and told me after their initial 6 months that the first thing they did was they were told to load ammunition on the tracks. And I'm not sure what's that new, the Crusader or Patriot, whatever the new vehicle is that the Army is. It's a wheeled vehicle. They were told that that's what they're going to do, and then they were going to go in the infantry. And I'm going, this is a waste of a person's skills. These are medics. Medics go with the infantry. They go with the troops. I don't have a problem with that, but not to let them use their trained skills is asinine. I thought it's really stupid, but what they're doing is saying, this is what we need, this is what you're going to become right now. And these kids are coming back, well, they're going to see a lot as medics anyway, but this one kid, I'll never forget, I won't mention his name, but he had a stare, and he's never going to be 24, 25 again, and he had the gray hair that I had when I was like 35 or 40. He's never going to be the playboy that he was. His life has radically changed now from what he's seen.
How do you think your time in the service had an effect on your life?
Oh, I think it had a profound effect. It's just like being a military brat had a profound effect. I still check my gig line every morning and during the day on my clothes. It's a periodic thing. I keep my hair short most of the time, although I am growing a beard now that I'm retired. There are certain things. I watch the Army-Navy game. There's just certain ways in your life. You know, you walk direct. I still walk with a 3-foot stride because that's how they taught you how to march back in basic training. Now they have an 18-inch or 15-inch stride. It's shorter, really aggravating, but they have a smaller stride. But there's certain things like that. I still press my pants. You know, I don't use starch anymore. I'm not anal about it, but there's certain things that the military impresses on you for the rest of your life. Like taps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't get sorry about the pledge of the national anthem, but every time I hear taps, I automatically stand up. I start to cry. I put my hand over my heart because I've lost friends over the years. Kind of stupid, I guess.
No?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the interview.
Sure.